Welcome back to the channel, guys. Another day, another rant. Third video on the channel. Like and subscribe. Uh, anyways, not today's rant. What are we going to talk about? Today, we're going to talk about Canada versus America, my opinion on the two, and if I could choose where I'd prefer to live and why. So, why am I talking about this rant? Well, why am I having this rant, rather? Well, if you look on social media right now, there's a lot of conversations about whether somebody should live abroad, whether somebody should become a digital nomad and live in different countries, whether somebody should even be living in America. And then, if you don't know this, many Canadians want to move to America. So what you have is you have Americans who are moving and becoming digital nomads in different countries. One example you'll see is people will live in Thailand. So another example you'll see is some people will move to Malaysia from America as nomads. But yet, like I said, you have Canadians who are attempting to move to the US. And I want to give my opinion and perspective on America versus Canada as someone who has family in many different states. Some I'll say are like Miami, Atlanta. There's other states. I'm not going to list every state, but I have a lot of family in America, and I also have family in Canada, being that I live here in Canada. And I want to just share my point of view. Now, I think I'll start off with economics, right? Canada versus America, economics. What's better? Now, I'm going to say off the bat, America wins this. If you look at GDP per capita, our GDP per capita in Canada is approximately 50% of that of America. So our GDP per capita is half that of America, right? So right off the bat, we're not winning in that category. Second category to talk about in relation to economics is productivity. Our productivity is the second worst out of all G7 nations. Only better than Japan. So all other G7 nations were worse, but we're only better than Japan. So that's how low our productivity is, meaning workers are not producing enough value, good services, etc. Right? We're not productive workers. We're not producing. So we're very low on the productivity scale. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I did just start this rant off with statistics, but I actually want to talk more from my lived experience, because you could read numbers like I just gave, and that'll give you data, but it won't let you know what it's like to live in Canada. And my gripe with Canada in terms of the whole productivity thing is our wages are noticeably lower than Americans, approximately about 30% for the same job, So you might say, well, why is productivity low? Well, what you have to realize is Canada is one of the most educated countries, meaning there are many, many, many Canadians with degrees. We also have very lax immigration laws, which means that many people come from different countries. Well, there's not many different countries, to be honest. Like, most of our immigration is from one country, mainly. That's just what it is. Like, it's mainly from one country, but it's in mass. It's many, 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 many. If you look up the numbers as to how much Canada's population has changed in the past few years relative to the population size, you probably won't even believe it. Your mind won't be able to wrap your head around it. You'll be like, how on earth is a country allowing that many immigrants to come into the nation, right? Like, your brain will struggle to wrap your head around it. It's that crazy. We're talking such rapid immigration that the culture has actually shifted. Like, like, this is not a joke. Like, this is the thing people don't seem to get when they're in America and they're looking at Canada. They don't realize that the culture has actually changed, because the immigration rate has increased at such a rapid rate that the people who are coming over, they're not assimilating because they're coming that quickly. There's no checks and balances. There's no encouragement to adapt to the core culture. It's just mass immigration, right? Now, how does this relate to the economics that I was ranting about prior when we're talking about the whole Canada versus America thing? Well, if you tie things together, low productivity, bad GDP per capita, mass immigration, very little jobs created, if you mix it all in a pot, the byproduct is abhorrent. It's terrible, right? Because you don't have enough jobs being created, but you have many people coming over seeking jobs. And so it creates a poor economic situation. So again, I want to talk about other subjects other than economics when we talk about Canada versus America. But if we're going to check something off the list in terms of who wins, Canada or America, America wins if we're talking about economics. Now, second thing I want to talk about, number 2, healthcare. Now, healthcare is one of those things where if you hear a naive view of healthcare in Canada versus America, it's very much like, well, Canada's healthcare is free, right? And that's what you always hear. Now, there's a lot of issues with this statement because unfortunately, it's intellectually lazy, because realistically, nothing's free. You pay for things via taxes. When you pay taxes, you're paying into the services. Now, someone listening might say, well, duh, but okay, let's pause and think about it. What if the percentage of your income which you're paying for taxes towards healthcare equates to how much you would be paying if you paid for healthcare insurance in America? Now, why do I bring that up? Why do I bring that up? Because if you're just referring to things as free or paid, but you're not actually computing how much you're paying per year from a tax perspective for that service, you might not actually be saving money. And some people will debate about how much of our taxes exactly go towards healthcare. And I'm sure if you really do the details, you could look into the exact numbers. But my overall point is, if you're in America, and let's say you're paying 150 to 200, it could range, right? It could be more. It could be more. It depends on your health ailment. But, in some cases, your employer pays for it, right? Or pays for a good chunk of it. And so if you're living in America and you're going to come to Canada thinking, oh, I'm just going to pay less in healthcare, you don't actually know that until you figure out, okay, number one, is my employer paying for it? Number two, like, what's the coverage? Like, there's a lot of factors. Like, we don't have our dentistry or dental covered here, right? And so when we talk about Canada versus American healthcare, believe it or not, although people won't understand this, it isn't that one beats the other. It's that it depends. It depends. It isn't, oh, I come to America, I come to Canada, healthcare is free, therefore it's better. That's not how it works. Another thing you have to consider with Canada's healthcare, which people don't think about, is the wait times. This is the scary thing about Canada's healthcare that people just don't want to acknowledge. But once you understand it and you go through it yourself, your perspective on free healthcare changes. Because think about it this way. Let's say you have a health ailment, and let's say it's something that requires immediate attention, right? Canada's healthcare system is so backed up due to mass immigration, you may have to wait 2 months or 3 months or 4 months or 6 months longer than you would in America. Now, when someone hears that, they might not believe me, but there's a documentary you can watch on YouTube called Dying to Wait by Aaron Gunn, and it's one of the many media pieces that discusses people literally deleting or the term would be ceasing to exist or passing, because we're on YouTube. They would be ceasing to exist because they waited for so long to get their treatment that they ceased to exist prior to getting their treatment. They ceased to exist prior to getting their treatment. So this is what I mean about the idea of free. If you can't even access the healthcare and you cease to exist prior to receiving it, why does it matter that it's free? Because you're no longer existing, right? And so again, this is where the nuance comes in, and this is what people are not comfortable talking about, because there's a lot of Canadians, unfortunately, who have an inferiority complex to America, and they see America as this big brother that hogs all the spotlight. And many Canadians feel like they're in the shadows of America, and they don't want to acknowledge all the issues that are in Canada. And so when you talk about comparisons, they never bring the nuance up. They give you very generic, canned answers that help make them feel better about the state of the country, right? And so, again, this is a rant, and I want to talk about many things, but when you compare the Canada versus America situation, when we're talking about healthcare, like I said, it is not, one is just instantly, it's not simple, right? If you're gonna say what I would prefer and what my preference is as to what I think is better, I would rather America's healthcare. Why would I rather America's healthcare? Because you have direct primary care, which is affordable in states like Texas, where you could potentially pay $80 per month for direct primary care. You get to pick your healthcare practitioner. In Canada, you really don't get to. Why do you not get to pick your healthcare practitioner? In Ontario, which is one of our most densely populated provinces, approximately 2 million people don't have a family doctor. So why did I say I prefer the American healthcare? Well, because when you're in America, you pick a healthcare provider, you could be very picky. There are many healthcare providers, there are many doctors, and there's direct primary care. So health is in your hands. You get to control your health outcomes. Whereas here, essentially, the government is picking your healthcare, because we mainly have public healthcare. We don't really have a private healthcare sector. And even when you look into the private healthcare sector, there are ways to get private health in Canada, but it isn't what you think it is, and it's very convoluted, and it's not something that you can really classify as in its sector. And that's a very nuanced topic, and I don't want to go into it for this video, but for the purpose of the video, we'll say we only have a public sector for the purpose of this video, because it's really nuanced in Canada when we talk about private healthcare in Canada. It's not like private healthcare in America. It's very different. So Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm really trying to say, in case it isn't obvious, is that, you know, Canada's healthcare is not better because it's free. It's not better because it's free. Guys, like, if you're really comparing the two nations, and you're not aware of how all this stuff works, yeah, I would definitely look into it for yourself and get real hand accounts. And also, if you're going to look into the Canada's healthcare, I'd also advise you to be really careful with who you get perspective from, because some people are unfortunately very healthy and they never have to deal with any health ailments. And because they don't have to deal with health ailments, they don't have to deal with the public healthcare system. So the biggest problem they might have had is they had a maybe they fell down and got a cut on their hand and they had to get, like, I don't know, some antibiotics, and maybe that's their perspective of the healthcare. But then you have to ask somebody who had cancer and had to wait to get their chemotherapy and how long it took them to get that, or even just detection, like how long it took to get detection. When we're talking about serious health ailments and serious sickness and serious infections, that's when you get a real perspective on Canada's healthcare system. Or people who go to the ER. I have been to the ER, and no exaggeration, I have felt better prior to the doctor seeing me, meaning that I waited so long, 7 hours in the ER before I got any attention. And so this is all what I talk about. This is all what I'm emphasizing when people want to speak about the healthcare system. It's like, until you actually have to go through it, you really don't know what it's like to have healthcare in Canada. And that's what's scary, because most people, they're very naive about healthcare here, and because and they've never really had to rely on the system. So when you ask them what they think about it, they'll just say it's free. Like, that unfortunately, like, it's sad, but that's how many Canadians think about healthcare here. Now, some people are waking up because they're having loved ones suffer in the healthcare system, meaning that they've actually had to go through it, or they've had a family member and they realize how poorly things are operated, and therefore their perspective shifts and changes on what they think about healthcare. But many people have never had to deal with the healthcare system here. And so when they give you their perspective, it's not a lived experience. It's not something that they have dealt with firsthand. It's like someone telling you what it's like to play professional football, and all they've ever done is watch it. It's like, that's not the same thing as having to go through it. And that's not just football. That could be anything. Anything that you have to do in the real world and have to go through for yourself personally firsthand, you're going to have a different perspective than if you're just looking on the outside, right? And so, yeah, I know this rant kind of got a little bit, went down a little bit of a wormhole, but I felt the need to go down that wormhole because the biggest debate between Canada and America is the healthcare. And too many people kind of just skip over the differences and the nuance in these conversations. And in general, on social media, people don't like nuance. People want everything to be contentious and divisive, and people don't want to have, like, analysis of anything. But like I said, if it was up to me, I would prefer America's healthcare system. Now, mind you, I'm aware that there are health elements that are very expensive in America, and I'm aware that some healthcare providers don't cover certain ailments and certain illnesses. So I'm not saying that there isn't situations where it can be bad, but knowing what I know about both healthcare systems, having family in both America and Canada, I would rather spend extra time figuring out the right provider for coverage and live in America than deal with this healthcare system in Canada. Because I'm telling you guys, if you go through it yourself and once you have to rely on it for serious health issues that aren't a joke, that aren't things you could just sweep under the rug, to me, that's where things just become a real issue. And I would rather be alive and have to incur a bill than have an even more severe health issue because of how poorly the healthcare treatment was, how slow it was, how inefficient it was. Because now you're going to have bigger issues, right? And sometimes when you have a healthcare problem, it can permanently change your life. And so anything you could do to rectify the issue as soon as possible is extremely valuable. And again, I know I'm ranting on the healthcare, but that's kind of the end of the healthcare thing. And this video is getting long. So I've listed two discussions. I've listed economics. I've listed healthcare. Now I'm going to do a third one, and this will be the closing, which is culture. So Canadian culture versus American culture. Now, what's the difference, right? So in America, Americans are very patriotic. They care a lot about their country. They care a lot about being American and what it means to be American. And they take pride in their culture. Now, pride's a tricky word, but I'm going to use pride in more of a self-respecting form rather than pride is in arrogance. So I'm going to say pride is in self-respect, not arrogance. Although, yes, there can be arrogant Americans. I'm aware of that. But, if we're talking about culturally, why I would prefer America over Canada is because, unfortunately, Canada has now decided that their culture is not something to be proud of. And Canada has denigrated itself in order to seem more appealing to other cultures, meaning that when you come to Canada, you're not buying into a culture, you're importing the culture where you came from, and you are pushing that into society. Now, mind you, I was born in Canada, and I grew up playing ball hockey on my street. I grew up having friends from a variety of backgrounds. I grew up having I had a Canadian experience growing up, right? So I'm here not pushing any culture. I'm here to assimilate, and I do consider myself Canadian first, right? I 100% consider myself Canadian first. This is where I was born, and this is where I live my life. So I'm for Canada first as a mindset. But with America first mindset is much stronger, and it permeates many states. Whereas you're not going to see that in Canada to the same extent. There's just too much of a passive, and we'll say there's a lack of willingness for Canadians to embrace their culture at the expense of allowing other cultures to dominate them. And so the culture gets watered down, and I don't like that. I prefer the American appreciation for the country. I prefer the patriotic elements. I prefer the respect other Americans have for the veterans. Yes, the government should do a better job treating the veterans well, but when I'm talking about culture, I'm saying I appreciate how much Americans value other Americans. And even from another cultural standpoint, if we're going to talk about from a religious perspective, if you look at America, America is, in terms of the modern era, it's the most Christian. It's one of the most Christian nations. Now, I'm aware it's being de-Christianized. I'm aware the rate of Christians in America is dropping to some extent. But if you were to compare the number of Christians in America versus the number of Christians in Canada, you're going to have more Christians in America. And as a Christian myself, as a Bible-believing Christian myself, I would rather be around I'd rather be in a Christian nation, right? Because I'm a Christian, right? It's just that simple. And so when I compare that to Canada, where it's a very secular nation, I'm not a fan of the secularism. And the funny thing about the secularism, and this is kind of the deceptive thing about secularism in Canada, on the surface, it says we're a secular nation, right? I'm not going to say it says that, but it's presented that way, right? But realistically, what really just ends up happening, and this is why it's annoying, is you still end up having a religious element here. It's just that it's less predictable because things sway so unpredictably, in the sense where if there are any religious or cultural wars in Canada, you can't predict how those will pan out because there isn't a core culture. Whenever you have a core culture, basically it's a more high trust society because you can predict the actions and the behaviors of people. But when you have cultures that clash in a drastic sense, you can't sit there and say, well, person A knows that this is courteous, person B knows that this is polite. That doesn't really exist in the way you think it would. Now, I'm aware that not all states have the same cultures and the same values. I'm aware of that. But what I'm saying is that if I go to America, there are many states I could go to and I can get a really strong gauge on the culture, which is very important because it allows you to trust people because you can predict their behaviors, which is important. And so, yes, in terms of culture, again, me personally, man, it's funny to say, but America again. And so that's just me personally. I prefer it. I know this rant's getting long, so I want to end this video with this. I made this is a Canada versus America compare video, but I'm making this video while knowing that Canada and America in 2024 are having a decline. And so I'm not making this video to pretend like America's a paradise, and I'm not making this video to pretend like, there isn't a decline happening in both nations, but I made this video more so as a comparison of the two and what I'd prefer and what I like. And so this is my personal preference. I did state a lot of statistics in the beginning, but yes, a lot of this is my preference and what I prefer. And so I think if you're watching this video and you want to gain some value from it, from a lived experience, someone who's been here for, a little bit over 30 years, if you want to get my perspective on it and my what I think you should consider if you're planning on living in Canada, is I would just say if you're going to come to Canada, I can't really see someone leaving America for Canada and living here and preferring it unless they have some sort of value alignment with Trudeau. If you don't have value alignment with Trudeau, I wouldn't say you should move here. Now, someone might say to me, well, what happens if someone else gets into power? Here's the issue with Canada right now. Things have shifted so much culturally that the amount of time it's going to take to rectify this, if it can be rectified, which unfortunately I deeply question whether or not that's possible, it's going to probably not change. So what I basically mean is, if you're coming here, or if you want to live in Canada and you're in America right now, again, like I said, unless you're somebody who aligns with Trudeau's values, which I'm not going to go into that right now, but unless you're someone who aligns with those values, I wouldn't come to Canada. I just wouldn't. If we're talking about America versus Canada, right? I'm not going to talk about other countries because this video is going to be even longer. I don't want this to be too long. But yeah, I would not advise you as an American to come here unless if I was an American, honestly, if I was American, I would strongly encourage you to move from state to state rather than move to Canada, because too many people in Canada are operating, too many people in America, because I'm losing my train of thought here. Too many people in America are looking at Canada through a rose-colored lens, and it's blinding them from what it's really like to live here. And I hope this video gave you clarity. And I know this was very long, but if you guys have any other questions, or you want to have any comments or ask me more perspective about Canada versus America as someone who's lived here for a bit over 30 years, I'll definitely make another video. But I did want to get this rant out. And I just hope that people who are living in America who think Canada is just like this paradise, I hope that this video sheds some light. And honestly, I could have made this video an hour long. I just gave you guys a little bit because, I could make other videos and you guys can tell me what you want me to specifically talk about as someone who's lived here for a while. But don't be deceived with this America versus Canada thing. Canada is not some casual, laid-back paradise where you just come here and everything just kind of, works out in your favor, and it's so much better than America, and it's like so much safer. And like, look, even with the crime thing, again, this video is getting long, but even with the crime thing, crime in America is very much dependent on state. It's dependent on city. It's dependent on county. It's like, this is what I mean. Like, this is why I think way too many people, when they are in America, they too quickly try to think, oh yeah, if I came to Canada, it'd be so much better. But they don't think too much. I don't think enough people think about how different it is just to move from state to state. You're going to make a big difference. And I would be very wary to come to a place like Canada when, you can move from one state to another and change your life. Like, that's a pretty big opportunity that you can do that. It's much harder to do that in Canada. But anyways, guys, this video is getting really long and I want to make it somewhat brief, even though it's not, but I was trying. Like I said before, like, comment, subscribe, and if you have any questions about Canada as someone who's lived here for a while and you're American, because that's what this video is about, definitely comment and let me know. Peace.